The world's first mapmakers, a journey through ancient cartography. Settle in, close your eyes, and let me take you on a gentle journey back through time, back to when the world was unmapped, unexplored, and the very idea of drawing the earth was a revolutionary act of imagination. The clay tablet in the dust. Picture, if you will, a warm afternoon in ancient Mesopotamia around 2300 BCE. The sun hangs low over the marshlands near Babylon, casting long shadows across reed houses and irrigation canals. In a modest clay brick dwelling, a Babylonian scribe sits cross-legged on a woven mat, carefully pressing a stylus into a soft clay tablet no larger than your palm. He is creating something extraordinary, though he doesn't yet know it. He is making one of humanity's very first maps. The tablet shows his immediate world, the Euphrates River, flowing like a serpent through the center, surrounded by circular mountains at the edge of everything known. Beyond those mountains, only mystery. Perhaps an endless ocean, perhaps the realm of gods. He doesn't claim to know. He simply draws what he has heard, what travelers have whispered, what priests have proclaimed. This scribe belongs to a civilization that invented writing itself, and now, almost as naturally as breathing, they are inventing the map. Not for exploration, not yet, but for something far more practical. Taxation, land ownership, and the eternal question of where one farmer's field ends and another's begins. The practical birth of cartography. The earliest maps weren't grand visions of continents or oceans. They were humble, necessary tools. In the fertile valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where agriculture first transformed human existence, land was everything. And when land is everything, knowing exactly where your land lies becomes a matter of survival. Imagine the disputes that must have arisen. Two farmers arguing over a boundary after spring floods had washed away their markers. A temple claiming authority over certain fields. A king's official needing to calculate how much grain each district should contribute. Without maps, these were endless quarrels, resolved only by memory, tradition, and whoever shouted loudest. But with a map, you had something solid. Something you could point to. The clay tablets excavated from sites like Nuzi and Nippur show us exactly this. Detailed surveys of fields, complete with measurements, owner names, and neighboring landmarks. One tablet carefully notes a field bordered by the canal of the new settlement on one side and the road to the shrine on the other. These weren't artistic endeavors, they were legal documents, administrative records. But in their practical simplicity, they represented a profound cognitive leap. To make a map, you must see the world from above, from a bird's perspective, from the viewpoint of a god. You must reduce three-dimensional reality to two-dimensional abstraction. You must agree that this line represents that river, this square that house. It requires imagination and agreement, reality and symbol working together. The Egyptian papyrus dreams. Now, drift with me northward and westward, to the banks of the Nile, where Egyptian civilization flourished under an unforgiving Sunday. Here, around 1150 BCE, a scribe unrolled a long piece of papyrus and began to draw something remarkable, what we now call the Turin Papyrus Map. This wasn't a simple property survey. This was an expedition map, showing the route to remote stone quarries in the Wadi Hammamat, deep in the eastern desert. The map depicts mountains rendered in delicate brown and pink pigments, Wadi's seasonal rivers sketched in careful detail, and the quarries themselves marked and labeled for stonecutters to find their way. Picture the scribe working by oil lamp, consulting with quarry foremen who had made the journey. After 2 days' march, you reach the black hills shaped like a camel's back, one might say. Beyond that, the wadi splits in 3 directions. Take the middle path. And the scribe would translate these oral memories into visual form, creating a document that could guide someone who had never made the journey before. This was a leap from the Babylonian field surveys. This map served exploration, industry, imperial ambition. The Egyptians were extracting precious stones from some of the most desolate terrain on Earth, and they needed guidance through waterless wastes where a wrong turn meant death. But Egyptian maps served another purpose too, one more spiritual than practical. Temple walls were sometimes inscribed with cosmological maps showing the journey of the sun god Ra through the underworld, the 12 hours of night depicted as regions to traverse. These were maps of the afterlife, guides for the soul's journey beyond death. Here, at the dawn of cartography, we see both impulses that would drive map-making for millennia: the practical need to navigate physical space, and the mystical desire to chart spiritual realms. The world you could touch, and the world you could only imagine. The Greek philosophers look upward. Let us move forward now, through centuries and across the Mediterranean, to ancient Greece around 500 BCE. Here, in the bustling port cities and philosophical schools, mapping becomes something new, an intellectual exercise, a scientific pursuit. Anaximander of Miletus, so the stories tell us, created the first world map that attempted to show all known lands. None of his maps survive. We know them only through descriptions by later writers, but they represented a revolutionary shift. Anaximander didn't just draw his own city or region, he tried to depict the entire inhabited world, the oikoumena, as the Greeks called it. Picture his world, circular, like a wheel, with the Mediterranean Sea at the center. Around it, the known continents Europe, Asia, and Libya, what we call Africa, arranged in a rough symmetry. Beyond them, an endless world ocean, Oceanus, surrounding everything like a cosmic river with no banks. This map was wrong in almost every specific detail, but it was right in its ambition, in its assumption that the world could be comprehended, reduced to a diagram, understood by human reason. Anaximander's student Hecataeus improved upon it, and later, Herodotus, the great historian, mocked these early circular maps. "I laugh when I see many drawing maps of the earth," he wrote, "showing ocean running round the earth in a perfect circle, as though traced by compasses, and making Asia equal in size to Europe." But even as Herodotus criticized, the fundamental Greek assumption held. The world had a shape, a structure, a logic that could be discerned and drawn. Then came the philosophers, who changed everything. The sphere of Eratosthenes. Sometime around 330 BCE, Aristotle made a series of observations that seem simple now but were revolutionary then. He watched lunar eclipses and noticed that the Earth's shadow on the moon was always circular, regardless of the eclipse's time or location. He noted that as you traveled north or south, different stars appeared in the sky. He heard reports that elephants lived in both far western Africa and far eastern India, suggesting the world curved back on itself. From these observations, Aristotle concluded, the Earth must be a sphere, not a disk floating on water, not a flat expanse under a dome. A sphere suspended in space, turning through the heavens. Within a few generations, this understanding became accepted among Greek scholars. And once you accept that the Earth is a sphere, map-making transforms entirely. You're no longer just drawing shapes on a flat surface. You're trying to project a three-dimensional object onto a two-dimensional medium. You're grappling with geometry, with mathematical relationships, with the distortions inherent in any such projection. Around 240 BCE, in the Great Library of Alexandria, the mathematician Eratosthenes accepted this challenge. He had read that in Syene, modern Aswan, at noon on the summer solstice, the sun shone directly down, a deep well, casting no shadow. But in Alexandria, 500 miles north, vertical objects cast shadows at that same moment. Eratosthenes measured the angle of the shadow about 7.2 degrees. He knew that 7.2 degrees represents 1/50th of a circle. If the distance between Alexandria and Syene was 1/50th of Earth's circumference, simple multiplication gave him the full circumference, about 250,000 stadia, or roughly 24,000 to 29,000 miles, depending on which stadian measurement he used. The actual circumference of Earth is about 24,900 miles. Eratosthenes, working with shadows and geometry and reported distances, came remarkably close, but he did more than calculate. He created a new world map, divided into climate zones running east to west. He placed a grid over the known world, not yet true latitude and longitude, but a systematic framework for understanding position. He listed distances between cities, the lengths of coastlines, the extent of mountain ranges. His map was lost, like nearly all ancient maps, but later writers described it, and from their descriptions, we can reconstruct his vision. A spherical world, mathematically understood, waiting to be fully explored. The masterwork of Ptolemy. Let us move forward again, now to around 150 CE, to Roman Egypt. The Library of Alexandria still stands, though diminished. In this twilight of ancient science, a Greek-Egyptian astronomer named Claudius Ptolemy sits in his study, compiling what will become the most influential geographic work for the next 14 centuries. His Geographia wasn't just a map, it was a systematic treatise on how to make maps. Ptolemy gathered coordinates for over 8,000 locations across the known world. He explained different map projections, ways of representing a sphere on a flat surface. He discussed how to show the curvature of the Earth on a page. He created maps of the entire world as it was known to Rome, and detailed regional maps of provinces and territories. Imagine the painstaking work, collecting reports from merchants, ship captains, military commanders, travelers, converting their measurements, often vague, sometimes contradictory, into coordinates. Ptolemy used the parallel of roads as his base latitude and counted longitude from the Canary Islands, which he placed at the westernmost edge of the world. His maps showed the Mediterranean Sea in remarkable detail, its coastlines and islands rendered with reasonable accuracy. Beyond that, things grew hazier. Britain was too far north and too squat. Southeast Asia melted into confusion. India was too small. He believed the Indian Ocean was an enclosed sea, with Africa curving eastward to eventually connect with China. And yet, within these eras lay a system, a method, a framework. Ptolemy didn't just say, "Here is the world." He said, "Here is how you figure out where things are, and here is how you draw them." For nearly a millennium, his work was forgotten in Western Europe, preserved only in Arabic translations in Baghdad and Cairo. But when Geographia was reintroduced to Europe in the early 1400s, it revolutionized cartography. Columbus owned a copy. Magellan's voyage was planned with reference to Ptolemaic maps. Even as Renaissance explorers proved Ptolemy wrong in specifics, they followed his methods. The Chinese secrets. But we have told only half the story. While Greek and Roman mapmakers charted the Mediterranean world, other civilizations pursued their own cartographic traditions, often in isolation, sometimes achieving greater sophistication. In China, maps emerged as early as the 4th century BCE. The philosopher-administrator Pei Xiu, serving in the 3rd century CE, articulated 6 principles of mapmaking that rival Ptolemy's work. Using a rectangular grid as a reference, maintaining correct scale, determining distances, representing heights and depths, accounting for angles, and noting curves and bends in features. Chinese maps often oriented south at the top, the opposite of modern convention, because the emperor's throne faced south, and to orient a map northward would symbolically turn your back on imperial authority. These weren't merely geographic documents, but political statements, representations of cosmic order with the emperor at the center of civilization. One remarkable Chinese map from 1137, carved in stone and now preserved in Xi'an, shows the Chinese coast with astonishing accuracy. The coastline, river systems, and the Great Wall are rendered in proportions and positions that closely match modern measurements. European maps of their own territories wouldn't achieve this level of accuracy for several more centuries. Chinese mapmakers also created tactical military maps, waterway charts for the Grand Canal, and celestial maps showing stars and constellations. They understood the Earth was round. This knowledge appears in Chinese texts from the 1st century CE, though they debated whether it was more like a chicken egg or a perfect sphere. The Islamic Golden Age of Mapping. As Rome fell and Europe entered its early medieval period, mapmaking in the West became largely symbolic. The famous Mappe Mundi world maps of medieval Christian Europe showed Jerusalem at the center, East at the top, hence Orient as a verb, meaning to align eastward, and continents arranged according to biblical geography rather than empirical observation. These were spiritual diagrams, more than navigational tools. But in the Islamic world, cartography flourished. Arab scholars translated Ptolemy into Arabic in the 9th century. They didn't simply preserve his work, they corrected it, extended it, revolutionized it. Muhammad al-Idrisi, working at the court of King Roger II of Sicily around 1154, created a world map and accompanying geographical text that improved on Ptolemy in numerous ways. He corrected the length of the Mediterranean Sea, which Ptolemy had exaggerated. He included more accurate information on Africa, Arabia, and Asia. Al-Idrisi's map oriented south at the top, following Arabic convention. It showed the world as a sphere, with climate zones, accurate distances, and detailed descriptions of regions, peoples, and trade routes. His silver planisphere, a map cast in precious metal for King Roger, has not survived, but copies of his maps circulated for centuries, influencing European mapmakers when they eventually encountered them. Other Islamic scholars made their own contributions. Al-Biruni calculated Earth's circumference with remarkable precision. Ibn Battuta traveled over 75,000 miles and documented his journeys in detail. The knowledge accumulated in Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba represented the most sophisticated geographic understanding in the medieval world. The Polynesian navigators. Yet even as these traditions developed in urban centers of learning, another form of mapmaking evolved in a radically different context. The vast Pacific Ocean. Polynesian navigators, with no writing system and no formal cartography as we've described it, nevertheless mapped an ocean covering a third of Earth's surface. Their maps were made of sticks and shells, three-dimensional models showing wave patterns, swells, and the locations of islands. These stick charts, particularly those from the Marshall Islands, encoded information about how waves refracted around land masses, creating patterns an experienced navigator could read even hundreds of miles from shore. But most Polynesian navigation was cognitive, held in memory and transmitted through apprenticeship. Navigators learned the rising and setting points of stars across the year. They learned to read clouds. Certain formations meant land beyond the horizon. They interpreted bird flight patterns, ocean colors, water temperatures, and the feel of swells against their canoes' hulls. These navigators settled islands separated by thousands of miles of open ocean, making deliberate two-way voyages, establishing trade networks, and creating a maritime civilization without precedent. Their mental maps were as sophisticated as any physical chart, encoding not just locations but the dynamic, ever-changing nature of oceanic travel. The legacy of first mapmakers. As you drift towards sleep, consider what these first mapmakers gave us. They gave us orientation, the ability to know where we are, where we've been, where we might go. They gave us perspective, the view from above, the God's eye view that lets us see patterns invisible from the ground. But more than that, they gave us the idea that the world could be known, that human consciousness could expand to encompass not just the valley or village, but continents and oceans, that what was unknown might someday be charted. Every map is an act of optimism, a declaration that chaos can be ordered, that mystery can be illuminated, that we are not helplessly lost in an incomprehensible world. The Babylonian scribe pressing his stylus into clay, the Egyptian artist mixing pigments for a quarry map, the Greek philosopher calculating the Earth's circumference, the Chinese official establishing his grid system, the Islamic scholar correcting ancient errors, the Polynesian navigator reading the stars, all were engaged in the same fundamental human project, understanding where we are in this vast cosmos. The maps they made were imperfect, often wildly inaccurate, sometimes more imaginative than empirical. But they were beginnings. They were the first attempts to hold the world in human hands, to see it whole, to trace its contours and commit them to memory and medium. And tonight, as you rest, you live in a world that has been mapped so completely that satellites can show you any corner of Earth at will, that digital systems can guide you door to door anywhere on the planet. But that world of complete knowledge began with a single line drawn in clay, a single coastline sketched on papyrus, a single grid imposed on the unknown. The first mapmakers saw farther than anyone before them. They imagined what lay beyond their horizons, and in doing so they gave us not just maps, but the possibility of discovery itself. Rest now in this mapped and known world, made possible by those ancient visionaries who first dared to draw the Earth. The end. Sleep well.